Hello, this is Bob Harris here on BBC Radio 2 with a fantastic lineup of music, reliving and celebrating some of the great highlights from Series 7 of the television music show, The Old Grey Whistle Test. During the next hour, we'll be spanning through 1977 and 1978, visiting James Taylor and Carly Simon on the island of Martha's Vineyard, and calling into the Bearsville Picnic in Woodstock in the company of John Sebastian. We'll hear classic archive from Patti Smith. Andy Partridge and I will be remembering the first ever appearance on the programme by XTC, and John Otway and Randy Newman will be playing live. But first, one of the great archive performances from Series 7, May 1978, and the debut appearance on British television of Dire Straits. This is an absolutely superb version of Sultans of Swing.
Get a shiver in the dark, it's raining in the park. South of the river, you stop and you hold everything. Band is blowing Dixie, double ball time. Feel alright when you hear the music ring. Well, now you step inside, but you don't see too many faces. Coming in out of the rain to hear the jazz go down. Competition in other places. Got the horns blowing that sound. Way on down south. Way on down south. London town. Check out Guitar George. He knows all the chords. When it's strictly rhythm, he doesn't want to make it cry or sing. Then an old guitar is all he can afford. When he gets up under the lights to play that thing. And Harry doesn't mind if he doesn't make the scene. He's got a daytime job, he's doing alright. He can play the honky-tonk like anything, saving it up for Friday night with the Sultans. The Sultans of Swing. Says at last, just as the time bell rings. Good night, now it's time to go home. It makes it fast, one more thing.
Sultans of Swing, that's Dire Straits, of course. I personally have such fantastic memories of that performance on Whistle Test. And Mark Knopfler, your thoughts about that moment and the way things were beginning to kind of arrive for Dire Straits.
Well, yes, there was a bit of an explosion, or a series of explosions that went off around the world after that, and you know, as each country discovered the thing, they sort of fell into it like it was like a deck of cards, or a house of cards, I should say. In fact, the UK was the last place of all.
Well, in a way, I mean, Dire Straits were slightly at odds, weren't they, with what was happening at the time, because punk and new wave had arrived in such a sort of, you know, explosion, and yet you were making music that relied more on the kind of tradition of what we'd seen through the previous few years on Whistle Test itself.
Yeah, it was, but but we sneaked in with everything else because we were a little four-piece, and we were playing fairly stripped-down music, and people used to just lump us in. So we were playing in all the same venues and all the same pubs and everything else. But the scene certainly needed that sort of cold blue flame of punk to shake it all up then, I thought. I mean, if I'd been 10 years younger or so, that's what I would have been involved in.
Well, I've always thought of you, you know, even right from day one, Mark, that your process of making music is an organic process. And I would remember the feeling of hearing the Notting Hillbillies for the first time. And that coming out of, you know, because Dire Straits had become so absolutely massive, hadn't they? Huge band, one of the biggest bands ever in the world. And you weren't necessarily just going to allow yourself to surf on that wave, that you began to dig a little bit deeper. And I thought the Notting Hillbillies was a fantastic example of you, as it were, keeping your feet on the ground, if that's quite the way to put it.
Well, I think keeping your feet on the ground, it's a cliche, of course. I think you've got to try to do that. It's as simple as that. When you're involved in something like the Dire Straits thing, you are in the eye of the storm, and it's all going on around you, so you're not always conscious of how big it actually is. But there's a damaging side to as you know, everybody knows, to success. And success itself is great because you can buy a new guitar and you can do all of those things. And I actually managed to build a studio in the end. And that's to be recommended. But there's another side of it that makes you feel as though you're being shredded. And of course, we fell into all the, you know, we just went out and made all our mistakes in public because what we were doing was running with the ball. And that's what happens. Mm.
The Notting Hillbillies, and through the last sort of 15, 20 years, Mark, the work that you've done with so many wonderful artists. I mean, I sense that you have a particular love of Nashville.
Not exactly. There is a side in Nashville which was then probably more than now, was a kind of production line which I didn't really feel identified with too much. But the talent itself in that town is phenomenal.
Yes.
And that's what's interesting about it. The amount of talent that comes into there from all over. And, well, when I first started recording there in 95 or whenever it was, you know, that was a great place to go, and you're in the business of making a record really fast. So for a songwriter, it's a great place. And it's actually gratifying to see that a few people followed along those lines and realised how much talent there is there.
And there is one final thing, actually, I meant to mention earlier, but Charlie Gillett, because at the time that you did appear first on Whistle Test, obviously you're one of the routes through to Sultans of Swing and Mercury Records and the appearance on Whistle Test and everything was Charlie Gillett. You know, he'd been so important in the very early days of the band.
Charlie really was. And I always used to love to go and do a program with Charlie over the years. After all that, you know, after all the dust settled, And for a while, actually, because Charlie had played the music first on Honky Tonk on Radio London, which was a Sunday program that I used to listen to, a lot of things happened from there. You know, the A&R guy at Mercury happened to be driving along and he heard it on that program. And lots of people heard it on that program around town and everywhere. And for a while, we talked to Charlie about doing something with Oval Records, in fact. And thinking about it now, we could have probably done that and got some kind of distribution or done something else. You know, it might very well have worked out. And it's pretty hazy now why we ended up going with the A&R guy who we got pally with from Mercury at the time. Actually, waiting for a record deal was one of the hardest things back then. I remember people being very interested and then falling out one by one, because, you know, part of that thing of if the record companies are after somebody and there's more than one of them, they don't like to be seen to be sometimes maybe in the race and maybe not leading that race, so they get themselves out of it quite quickly. And I've got memories of that too, sitting in Deptford, wondering if anybody was in fact going to sign us at all.
And they did.
Yeah, they did, and off we went.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's what we wanted. It's what I always wanted. I had these songs that were pushing very hard, and I was looking for a little thing with four wheels that I could actually float these songs on. And they were just pushed so hard, and in the end, it had to happen. And it just really went downhill from there. It's just, that was the top of the big old slippery slope, I'm afraid.
Mark Knopfler talking about the late Charlie Gillett and the huge success of Dire Straits, and we heard their brilliant studio performance of Sultans of Swing.